I'll give you 1 million if you cure me. The millionaire smirked, until the child touched him. What if a billionaire, paralyzed and poisoned by his own cynicism, suddenly gets back on his feet after a strange ritual performed by a nameless street boy? What if this miracle doctor turns out to be a victim of his own soulless corporation? Before we begin, write in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. If someone had said that Alejandro Torres's fate would be changed by a boy with a torn sleeve and a toy stethoscope, they would have laughed and added something sarcastic. But that's where it all started. Alejandro Torres hated parks, especially on Sundays. Especially this one, noisy, with the pungent smell of popcorn and crowds of children who, for some reason, always ran too close to his stroller. He hated their screams, their toys, their freedom. He sat in the shadow of Play-Doh, surrounded by silence. Not because the park had become quieter, but because the security guards, polite, but persistently drove away everyone within a 20-meter radius. Torres had had a stroke 5 years ago. His left side was completely paralyzed. His right side was almost numb. He could speak. He could think. He could despise. And he did so with the skill of a scalpel. What are you playing with here? He snorted at the group of children. We're doctors. A girl with 2 ponytails and a plastic folder in her hands answered happily. We save lives, we do. Did you know that everyone dies? Even you, especially you, if you treat as poorly as you dress up. The children were at a loss. Some began to whine, but one boy remained standing, short, thin, with his head uncovered and a very serious look. A red stethoscope hung on his chest, a toy one, but he held it like a surgeon holds a scalpel. And, do you want to be cured? He asked calmly, looking straight into Torres's eyes. You. The mockery in Alejandro's voice was almost affectionate. The best clinics in the world pay me for my treatment. They couldn't. And you, in exchange for pie, will you fix my spinal cord? No, the boy replied. In exchange for 1 million. If you get up after my treatment, you'll give me 1 million. If not, nothing. Alejandro looked at him with a long, searching gaze. He had seen many things. Liars, swindlers, fanatics. But in the eyes of this boy Lucas, as it would later turn out, there was something else, a calmness alien to children, a strange confidence. And how are you going to do it? Trust is the main condition. You must allow me to perform the ritual. Not laugh, not interfere, just trust. Torres grinned. His guards exchanged glances. One of them leaned over. Sir, do you want us? No, he interrupted. Let him treat. It's interesting, isn't it? And then file a complaint against him for fraud. Lucas took a small box from his backpack, cut out from under shoes. Inside were colorful ribbons, a stone, and some kind of photograph. He laid it all out next to him, moving his hands, whispering something barely audible. Alejandro looked at him and felt something long forgotten, something illogical, begin to stir somewhere inside. The boy touched his hand. The palm was warm, unusually warm. Done, he said. Tomorrow you'll get up, don't forget about the 1 million. He gathered up everything he had brought and left simply, without effectual words, without show. He walked off to the side, where the trees were thicker and the houses older. One of the guards wanted to. Brilliant. He didn't even try, just waved his hands. Alejandro also smiled, but with a strange aftertaste. He returned home in his usual gloom, fell asleep in his technologically advanced bed with its automatic body rotation system, and woke up in pain. But the pain was different. It was something like a cramp. He, at first, thought it was a reaction to the medications, then another malfunction. But when he looked down, his eyes widened. The big toe of his right foot twitched. He tensed, tried to focus, and then movement again. He couldn't believe it. He called the nurse, then the doctor, then the whole team. His hands were shaking. For the first time in 5 years, he felt them shaking, not just from anger. 3 hours later, he was standing against the wall with support, but he was standing. It's impossible, the neurologist said. You have had a complete interruption of spinal conduction. This is a miracle. This is not a miracle, Torres whispered. It's a duty. He remembered the boy's gaze, that calm voice. Tomorrow you will rise. He stood up. Now he needed to find the one who healed him. He dreamed of running clumsily out of breath, but running. And at every turn, it was not illness or death that overtook him, but a shadow with the boy's face. When he woke up, the sun struck the windows with such brazenness, as if it knew this day would be special. But unlike in the dream, there was no running here. There were slow, hesitant steps, the first in years. He held on to the rail as if it were a last resort in his struggle with reality. He walked from the bed to the chair, 10 steps. Each took effort, but each was real. The world within him hummed with change. He didn't know how to explain it. The doctors didn't know either. The scans showed nothing out of the ordinary. The damage to the spinal cord remained, but somehow, the neural circuits had begun to heal. This was unheard of. It almost never happened, or very rarely, in very few people. Spontaneous neuroregeneration, they said, adding, it's inexplicable, but perhaps unstable. He nodded, but he knew one thing. It wasn't a coincidence. He went to the park the very next day, without security, without an announcement, without a chair. He simply came and sat on the same bench under Plato. People didn't recognize him. A gray-haired man with a cane, in a simple gray coat. He waited. Where's that boy? He asked the children who were playing nearby again. Which one? The one with the red stethoscope. His name is Lucas. They exchanged glances and shrugged. No one knew. No one even remembered. Perhaps he was from another neighborhood. He came there every day, sat from morning until evening, sometimes alone, sometimes in a crowd. Sometimes reporters came by. News of the miracle had already begun to leak out. To the press. He waved them off and looked for Lucas. One evening, when the leaves were already flying across the asphalt, a man sat down next to him. A homeless-looking man in a smoke-soaked jacket, but with lively eyes. Are you looking for him? He asked quietly. Alejandro looked at him with distrust. Lucas, I know who you're talking about. I saw him do it. Where he is? I don't know exactly, but he's been seen a couple of times. Near the old school on the outskirts, where the houses were torn down. Now there's supposedly a shelter, or something like that. The roof leaks, but nobody cares. The address? The man gave. An intersection. Alejandro took out his wallet and handed over a bill. I'm not here for the money. The man waved him off. It's just good when rich people look for the right people, and not the other way around. The school he'd spoken of stood as if torn from time. Graffiti covered the walls. The cracks in the windows were overgrown. By the fence, a sign on the gate read, Project, slated for demolition, but behind it, a child's voice, laughter. Someone was singing. He crossed the courtyard and pushed the door. Inside, it smelled of dust, soup, and something warm and human. The walls were peeling, but they were covered with children's drawings. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. He saw her. First, an old woman in a headscarf with a tired face but kind eyes. Excuse me, I'm looking for a boy named Lucas. She froze, then straightened up. Are you Alejandro Torres? Yes. He nodded silently. He said you would come. Where is he? He's outside, but he'll be back soon. She walked forward, pointing to the photographs. On the wall, people at home before and after. He stopped. His hand trembled when he saw the logo. His logo, yes. These houses were torn down according to your plan. We were relocated to nowhere. There was no compensation. We didn't protest. We had no strength. We stayed here. Me, Lucas, and 8 other families. Alejandro stood in silence. Every word of his grandmother struck him, or rather, the surgeon. His businessman's memory clearly recalled the details. Expropriation, liquidation, non-residential property. He even remembered the meeting. Someone had said, some old people and migrants live there. No problem. He didn't object. He hadn't cared then. And now he stood in the destroyed orphanage where the boy who had saved him had lived. Suddenly Lucas appeared in the doorway, still the same, but no longer toy-like. His eyes were more serious than a child should be. He came up to me and said, I knew you'd come. Why did you do this? Alejandro asked hoarsely. Because you were alone, and one person isn't a death sentence. Sometimes it's even a miracle. He didn't ask about the million, didn't talk about promises. He simply came closer and quietly said, now it's your turn. He thought he knew the value of everything. Money, work, people. But that evening, Walking through the dark corridors of the abandoned school with a bowl of soup in his hands, he realized he had never known the value of shame. The first few days, he simply came, sat in the corner, and watched. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes medicine, sometimes he just sat in silence. No one chased him away, but no one rushed to hug him either. They treated him with wary respect. Too well-dressed, too upright, an outsider. Alejandro felt like he was being watched. They didn't trust him, and he accepted it. He washed the floor for the first time. A real floor, rough, with streaks of paint, with dried stains. The washing went on. Slowly. His legs were giving out, his arms were aching. He didn't complain. Lucas simply silently handed him a rag and watched. Everything changed one evening. It was raining. The roof was leaking over the old warehouse. Water was running right onto the child's bed. Carmen, Lucas's grandmother, tried to plug the leak with a blanket. Alejandro, without saying anything, took off his cashmere coat, climbed onto the windowsill, and began propping up the roof with a board. "You'll fall," she said. "I already have. It's as low as it gets," he replied. When he returned to the floor, barefoot, wet, with dirty hands, the children laughed for the first time, not beside him, but with him. That night, he stayed overnight on an old mattress in the hallway, without a pillow, without the familiar buttons by the bed. Just him, a blanket, and silence. In the morning, Carmen brought him a cup of tea, handed it to him silently, and left. He realized he belonged now. Lucas watched him with quiet wariness. He didn't show open delight. He simply accepted. Here he was, the man who had been upstairs, now here, nearby, without a crown, without a chair. "Why didn't you say anything about the house being torn down?" Alejandro once asked. "And what would that have changed?" The boy shrugged. "We wouldn't have gotten the house back. Not the grandfather who died there. Not the neighbors who were driven out. I thought it would be better if you saw it for yourself." I saw. He saw not just the destruction, he saw the consequences. Before, the numbers in the reports were abstract. 32 houses demolished. It sounded like a plan, not a tragedy. Now these houses slept in the hallways, wore torn shoes, taught children to read by the windows, through which the wind blew. Every evening, he brought something needed to the shelter. First, warm clothes, then a portable generator, then work gloves, nails, flashlights. He didn't call his helpers, didn't take selfies, he did everything himself. And the more he did, the clearer he understood. He doesn't fix things, he returns them. One evening, Lucas approached him. "You can just buy everything, like before. Why don't you do it this way?" "Because before, I built on paper, but now I do it with my hands. And only then do I understand how much each brick is worth." Lucas looked at him for a long time. "Something new appeared in your eyes. What is life?" That evening, they played cards for the first time. Lucas, the two other children, and Alejandro. He lost, but he laughed and couldn't remember the last time laughter had been not a defense, but a sincere response from within. The next day, he brought a plan with him. "What is this?" Carmen asked. "A plan. I want to rebuild houses. First, 2, next to the park, then a school, then a neighborhood, but they are skyscrapers, real homes for people." She looked at him for a long time, then quietly said, "People don't need palaces. They need faith that they won't be thrown out. I took that faith, now I want to give it back." He understood that this was only the beginning. Giving it back doesn't mean erasing it, but maybe you can learn to live with it and do things differently. That same evening, Lucas sat on the windowsill, writing something in a notebook. Alejandro came over. "What are you writing?" "A list of people to help." "Who else is left on the street?" "Who's sick?" "I want to gather them all." "You're still a child, but not stupid." Alejandro nodded. He also began to keep a list, only in his notebook, of those he owed money to, and he started with himself. The morning began with a strange silence. No footsteps from Carmen in the kitchen, no grumbling from her. Even the kettle was silent, and that was more frightening than anything. A scream. Lucas was the first to notice that his grandmother hadn't gotten up. He approached her room, knocked softly, then pushed the door open. Carmen lay on her side, her face pale and breathing raggedly. Her lips were dry, her skin grayish-yellow. She opened her eyes, looking somewhere past him, and whispered, "Water." Lucas rushed to the kitchen, but his hands were shaking, and he almost dropped the glass. His grandmother barely drank the water. She took a sip, and She closed her eyes again. Alejandro was in the basement at the time, helping reinforce the beams. He was called, and he came right away. When he saw Carmen, his heart sank, not from fear, but from that feeling he had previously called weakness. Now he knew it was love. Did they call the doctor? He asked. The old nurse said it could be kidney failure, maybe. And we have no money, no car, someone answered. We have both, said Alejandro. Get ready. The three of them drove off. He, Lucas, and Carmen, who was carefully placed in the back seat. On the way, the boy was silent, only holding his grandmother's hand and whispering, "You'll get better. I'll do it like with Alejandro. I can do it." At the hospital, everything happened quickly. Urgent tests, a stretcher, a gurney. Lucas didn't leave his side. He tried again. The same ritual as that time. In the park. The same movements, the same words. Alejandro watched him take out that same box with ribbons and stones. Place it at the head of the bed, close his eyes. Stay silent, waiting for nothing. The doctors came out half an hour later. A middle-aged woman, with a tired but kind face, looked at them. Your grandmother's left kidney has failed, and the right one is also on the verge of failing. A transplant is needed. Urgently. I'll pay. Whatever it takes, said Alejandro. Money is not a problem. The question is, there's almost no time left in the donor area. Lucas stood, as if stone, his eyes filled with tears, but he did not cry. He looked at his hands, the very ones with which he had once healed. And now there's emptiness. Why isn't it working? He whispered. Why not now? Alejandro sat down next to her. His voice was low, with a rasp. Because you're not a god, Lucas. You're just a boy. You gave me what science couldn't give. But this is different. This body, pain, blood. He fell silent, then quietly added, maybe. It's my turn now? The next morning he had the tests done. They were a match, and he was completely compatible. You're quite old, the doctor said cautiously. And just one functioning kidney is a risk. Are you sure? Absolutely. Before signing the papers, Lucas approached him. Why are you doing this? Alejandro looked at him for a long moment. So that you don't lose what I lost. Forever. What? Someone who loves you, unconditionally, without fear, without calculation. It's not a duty. It's perhaps the only thing that truly matters. The operation was successful. Carmen woke up a day later, smiled at Lucas, and kissed his palms. I knew you were there, she whispered. He wanted to tell her that it wasn't he who saved her, but he didn't. She already knew everything. Alejandro came to later, lying with his eyes closed. The weakness was unbearable, but somehow different. Light. Lucas entered the room. He was holding an envelope. He silently placed it on the nightstand. What is this? Alejandro asked. A check? $1 million. Did you sign it? I'm tearing it up. He took the paper from his pocket, tore it in half, and threw it in the trash. Why had Lucas sat next to him? Because real deeds can't be bought. You don't get paid for what you've done. You get thanks for it. He stood up and left, leaving silence behind him. Alejandro closed his eyes and smiled for the first time in many years. Not a businesslike smile. Not polite. Not fake, but genuine. He knew there was much pain ahead, much work, but he already knew why he lived. 3 months after his discharge, Alejandro was digging the earth himself with a small shovel, his side bandaged, wearing a thick shirt. He was digging a trench for a water pipe, and if anyone who knew him a year ago had seen it, they wouldn't have believed it. Be careful, don't strain yourself, the nurse said, watching his movements. I've already donated my kidney. My muscles will hold up somehow, he responded with a grin. He had lost weight, sat even more heavily, and began walking slowly with a cane, but there was something new in his every movement. Tenacity, meaning, purpose. The formerly abandoned school was now bustling with activity. His design was being used to create the Carmen Institute here, an educational center for children from devastated areas. Not just a shelter, not just a classroom with wallpaper, but a real place where children would be safe and interested in living and learning. Every morning, he came there like a worker, sometimes with papers, more often with tools. He was not a leader, but a participant. He lifted boxes, painted walls, checked the ventilation. The children no longer feared him. He became Uncle Alejandro to them, sometimes with candy, sometimes with jokes, sometimes simply by their side. He sat on the floor with them, assembled construction sets, read fairy tales. "Were you really a billionaire?" one boy asked. "I was," he replied. "And now I'm a man." He no longer lived in a mansion. He bought himself a small apartment near the school, cooked and washed his own clothes. Sometimes Carmen looked after his meals, but otherwise he was learning to live anew without servants, without drivers, without isolation from the world. Lucas was hardly a child anymore. He had grown tall, wore glasses, kept notebooks with neat notes. He was studying in specialized courses, which Alejandro himself had paid for, and was preparing to enter medical school. He was the first to speak at the opening of Carmen's Institute. The hall was full. Children, parents, volunteers, construction workers, cameras, officials, everyone was there. But he was the main one. Lucas stood on the stage in a light shirt and with the same serious expression that he had once had many months ago, looking at the man in the wheelchair. "Under Plato, I once played doctor," he began, "and told one man that I could cure him. I was only 9 years old then. And you know what? I didn't know if I could, but I believed." He looked around the room, and then he healed me not with my body, but with my actions. He showed that any evil done to others can be corrected. Not with money, not with my hands, not with my choices, not with my actions. I want to become a doctor. I want to help others, as I was once helped. He turned around. Alejandro was sitting in the front row with a cane, but without a suit. Just corduroy pants, a shirt, and eyes full of tears. Lucas came up to him and hugged him. "You'll always be the one who healed me," he said quietly. They were silent. Words weren't needed. The very park where it all began. Alejandro was sitting on a bench under the sycamore tree. The children were playing doctor. Lucas, now the eldest, stood nearby, watching. One girl ran up to him. "Uncle Alejandro, have you ever been to a doctor?" "Yes," he chuckled. "Even the best one." "Which one?" "The one who didn't heal the body, but healed the soul." He closed his eyes and inhaled. The scent of summer, the wind, the laughter, the leaves. All of this had been before, but he hadn't heard it. Now, he heard it. Now he was no longer a billionaire. He was a man who had found redemption. And, most importantly, he realized a true legacy isn't the numbers in the bank, but what you leave to others. Through actions, through love, through those who go further.